You got to remember, immigration is a political portfolio, and it goes back and forth based upon the political winds of the day. You only get one postgraduate work permit.
Yes.
Okay? So if you only get one, do you want to take that 3-year postgraduate work permit after you graduate from a bachelor's degree, knowing that you're probably never going to score 530 CRS points to qualify under express entry?
Could you share a bit about your journey, Catherine, how you got into immigration law and what inspired you to specialize in this field?
Well, to be honest with you, it actually kind of happened by accident. I became a lawyer. People are usually very surprised to learn this because they think of me as a rather strong individual, but I went into law because my father told me to. So he's a doctor, and that was not really my vocation or my interest, and so he recommended law, and that's the direction I went into. And I was prepared for that probably by the time I was in grade 3 or grade 4. Wow. And then immigration law was, again, by accident. I was going to be a litigator. I got called to the bar in 1988, and then I took a year off and I went to Japan and taught English for a year, which interestingly enough has been a very useful skill set to have in dealing with immigrants. But anyway, when I came back from Japan, I didn't find employment right away, which I gave myself a colossal 3 weeks to find a job. So I decided to open up my own firm. And one of the things that I did was I accepted legal aid referrals. And legal aid at that time was criminal law, family law, and immigration law. So I didn't do family law, but I did take on criminal cases and immigration cases, and they were night and day. I didn't enjoy the criminal work or my clientele, and I loved my immigration work and my immigration clientele. And on one day, somebody said, "Thank you, Miss Catherine," and I kind of melted into a puddle, and that was my career.
That's amazing, very inspirational. What are the most rewarding aspects of your practice?
Helping people achieve what their immigration goals are. And they're very different. Sometimes I do say that I am a family lawyer because the impetus for most people to immigrate is they want to give their family a better life. Mm-hmm. But whether it's helping somebody come as a student or a worker, which is a temporary purpose, or become a permanent resident, to avoid being deported or removed from Canada, or to reunite with family, all of those things are rewarding when they actually take place.
How the immigration landscape keeps changing. So I think we need more people like you.
There are a lot of practitioners that's what keeps them in the field. I can remember when I was a partner in a large national law firm, and they circulate students throughout the various departments, and they would come and work for, a week or two with me, and they would come back and say, "Can I do more work with you?" Because it was so gratifying, because you really see tangible results in affecting change in people's lives, and that's very special.
So how has Canada's immigration policy adapted in response to post-pandemic economic needs, and what does this mean for students?
Well, actually, I don't think it has adapted to the post-pandemic reality, and I think that realistically, that's why we are seeing a lot of these changes. During the pandemic, immigration shut down. And arguably, it was one of the last government departments to pick up the pace and start doing things again. But they were still receiving applications, or people were still registering profiles, and there were applicants that were going into the pool to become, in express entry. Business applicants were still submitting applications, and when they came out of the deep sleep that they were in, they were inundated with work that they couldn't process. I can see that in 3 or 4 years, when the people that are already in Canada work, two things are going to happen. Either they are going to work their way through the system and become permanent residents, or they're going to give up and return to where they were. And then new people are going to come, and there's going to be a different process for assimilating them. So I do think this is a problem that stems from the pandemic, and it's going to take some while to work its way through the system.
From your perspective, what makes Canada an attractive destination compared to the other countries when a student from India is considering a study abroad option?
I don't think the United States is that welcoming an environment as an international student. First of all, school in the United States is even more expensive than it is in Canada. So I hear a common complaint is international students have to pay so much money. They do have to pay so much money, but American schools are far more expensive than Canadian, and they're not welcoming. The United Kingdom, same issue. They've closed their program, and they're not welcome. And they've been doing that much longer than Canada has. I can tell you I've been on panels through the International Bar Association, and they've been shutting their programs for 5 or 6 years. So Canada is still a good bet, and it's really learning how to navigate this new world. You know, when we were talking a bit yesterday, I was explaining to you that you kind of have to think of yourself as being a surfer on a surfboard. And when you are in the ocean, you never know where the waves are going to come from. And you have to learn you have to be agile, you have to navigate the water. And the paradigm towards immigration has to change. The model and the mindset for international students that they have had in the past, or for immigrants in general that's been in the past, is not the wave of the future.
Interesting. Since you have a lot of experience in immigration law, you must be wary of some challenges students face while applying for a study permit, Canadian study permit. So, is there anything any specific challenges these students face?
There are always challenges that people face. I mean, especially if you're coming as an international student, you've got a new culture, you've got a new language, there's a new way of doing things. India is very different from Canada, and Canada is very different from India. And at least the students that you have here at UFV have been given a pretty good introduction through the various professors and the various students who've been to Canada of what to expect. But one of the things that I see that international students struggle with, or their naivete, is they think that somebody's going to do things for them. You know, either they're going to have an agent or a consultant do something for them, or the student is going to the school is going to do something for them. And that's just not realistic. Part of post-secondary education is making your way in the world and figuring out how to stand on your own 2 feet and figuring out what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, what you're good at, what you're not good at. So having somebody take care of you, you're not with mom and dad anymore, and your school is not an extension of mom and dad. So you need to learn how to be independent.
I think it's more about changing your mindset.
Yes.
Parents do come and sometimes speak with us about how will a kid adapt in Canada, this, that. I'm like, you send them to Delhi, send them to Mumbai, they're going to face similar challenges. It's different culture. It's just that you are 2 hours away by flight, and in Canada you are 20 hours away. But this challenge is everywhere.
I always say that all students, when they leave home, if they leave home to go to school, and many do. My son went to school in Ontario. He did pathetically. He thought he was doing fine. He partied too much, and when he finished his first year, he was on academic probation. It was a big slap in the face. So many students find the challenge of not being in a familiar situation, a familiar environment, to be challenging. That gets multiplied by the power of 10 when you're sending somebody from halfway around the globe to a different country, to a different culture. That it takes a lot.
Talking about, and since you also have this experience with your son, when a student transitions from any country, but in this case from India to Canada, what do you think they need to prepare for in terms of culture and academics?
Well, I would say that you need to start early before you go abroad, to immerse yourself in the language that you're going to be in, and not just at school, and learn the customs and the expectations at school and at work. When you don't take the easy way out. And I have this conversation when I meet with students here at UFB. I say, okay, where do you think you're going to live when you go to Canada? Are you going to live in residence? Are you going to live with your friends? Some tell me that they have students that are ahead of them. They can go and live them. I said, great. So you're going to go to school and it's in English. What language are you going to speak when you come home? Oh, I'm going to speak Hindi or Punjabi or whatever. I said, oh, well, then you're wasting your education. You really have to immerse yourself. And quite frankly, you should be doing that before you leave here. One of the things I recommend to the clients that are in my office, get a Maclean's magazine subscription. The Maclean's magazine in Canada is the equivalent of the Times of India or Time magazine or Newsweek. And it's a good way not only to learn about what's going on in Canada, but also to familiarize yourself with what the issues of the day are, and reading at a level that is not what you read at in India. I read the newspapers when I'm here, and I could tell you, Indian English is not the same as Canadian English. They're very different. So don't just speak your language when you are at work or speak your language when you are at school. You've got to speak it all the time. Radio, television, newspapers, magazines, your friends, because if you only do it 8 or 6 or 7 hours a day and then you go home where you're longer, you're nullifying everything that you've absorbed. And language is hard to pick up. And it's one of the most important factors, probably more important than your education, if permanent residence is your goal.
Just on the sideline, you know, I think 3 languages.
In addition to English, I've studied French, I've studied Japanese, and I've studied Russian. But I lived in Quebec, and I worked and I had to speak it. So, and I lived in Japan, and I had to speak it. But I studied Russian, and I've never had to speak it. I did a lot of refugee claims where Russian was interpreted. My family background is Russian, which is why I studied the language. But I've never been immersed in it, and so I've never actually learned how to properly speak it.
So Canada has several pathways for students to transition to permanent residency. Which ones do you feel offer the best opportunities currently?
Well, going back to what I said earlier, that the paradigm has to change. The systems that are there, but your ability to access them is much harder. I encourage a STEM education. I like the PNP programs. The Francophone Mobility or the Francophone Express Entry program is a good one. People are going to have to be versatile. They're going to have to be like some of your UFE grads who have gone to Canada and done their work experience and then come back to India and got more work experience in India and then applied for permanent residence. Many of them are going to take their 4 years of education, whether it's all 4 years here at UFE Chandigarh or some in Canada, and then take a master's degree. So people are going to have to learn to navigate the new world order for Canadian immigration and figure out what's going to work for them. The other thing that I would ask people to think about is think about Charles Darwin. What did Charles Darwin write? Origin of the Species. What's the principle that book stands for? He came up with the principle of survival of the fittest. The strongest survive. The strongest international students, the ones that are the cream of the crop, the ones that adapt, they're the ones who are going to get permanent residence. And by coming to a school like UFE, they're already heads and shoulders above other Indian international students or other international students in general. But not all UFE international students or grads are going to get permanent residence. So there's going to have to be some flexibility and some understanding of that process to figure out what am I going to do if this is really what I want to achieve.
I think to summarize this, it's not that you will not get a permanent residency, but you have to be agile. You have to be agile. You have to adapt to the new requirements, and you have to make the effort. Simply graduating, getting a work permit will not get you permanent residency.
No, I won't.
That's very insightful.
I mean, it's possible. It's possible, but it's not likely. And so you have to think about, and the other thing that's really important, you only get one postgraduate work permit.
Yes.
Okay? So if you only get one, do you want to take that 3-year postgraduate work permit after you graduate from a bachelor's degree, knowing that you're probably never going to score 530 CRS points to qualify under express entry? Or do you want to say, I'm going to get my 4-year degree, and then I'm going to come back home, and I'm going to get some work experience with that valuable Canadian education. And then after 2 or 3 years, I'll go back to Canada and take a master's program, and then I'll get my 3 years of postgraduate work experience in Canada. So now you've got a Canadian education, you've got foreign work experience, you've got foreign education or Canadian education, and you've got Canadian work experience, and you've worked on language proficiency, ideally both in English and in French, and your points are going to go up and up and up. And so you have to think about this new strategy to achieve the goal that you want to get.
So for students who want to stay in Canada long term, what steps should they take early to increase their chances? I think we've already talked about this, and it's...
Well, I think now I'm really... I forwarded you some material, a blog that I wrote just the other day. And when I've been here in the past years, many students have told me that they're studying French. And I've always said, I don't know if it's worth the investment. I've learned a lot of languages, and it takes a lot of work to learn a language. You have to invest a lot of time, you have to practice, you have to use the language. Just studying it in a book or writing assignments, it doesn't give you that working experience where you can actually communicate with somebody. I would tell people that they have to start learning French. I've suggested to you that you may want to offer not just one French language course, but maybe 2 or 3, and set up a French language club. I encourage your students to take a French exchange program, or go spend some time in a French-speaking country over the summer and take a 3 or 4 month course during the summertime, because you have to acquire that knowledge and experience over time so that you will get the points that you need to be able to qualify. But it's a combination of, you get more points for both English and French than you do for just English or French. And you get more your score that you need for the French program is lesser than what it is for the regular programs under Express Entry. So you get a double whammy. You get more points, and you'd require fewer to qualify for permanent residence.
Any common pitfalls or legal tips that you have from your experience?
Well, I can't say it's a legal tip. I would say you need to work with a qualified representative, okay? And again, that goes back to the point that I made before, that a lot of students think that they can just rely on their school to tell them what they need to do. And I do know the strong background that UFE has in nurturing its students, and your people understand the process for permanent residence, but it is really incumbent on the student to embrace the responsibility of qualifying on their own. This is not something that you want to work with the most affordable person out there. You want to work with the most competent person out there. So you've got to choose who you're working with carefully to ensure that you're meeting your goals. And students also need to accept that this is now a long-term initiative, and it may require you to go back and forth more than once to get Canadian work experience. The sweet spot for Canadian permanent residents now is foreign education and foreign work experience, Canadian education, Canadian work experience, and strong language proficiency, ideally in both French and English. Now, a UFE grad from Chandigarh will have a Canadian education, and they may not have an Indian education, but they have the opportunity to come back and get foreign work experience and to also get Canadian work experience. You just have to change the mindset that they've had in the past.
What are some common mistakes students make during their immigration process?
As I said, one of the most common is they only immerse themselves in their new Canadian language, English and French, either when they are at school or when they are at work. When people are in my office in Canada, I tell them, you need to eat, sleep, breathe, and dream in English, okay? You don't even call your mom and dad and speak to them in your language. You call and speak to them in English or French if that's your language. Maybe you can speak to your grandmother or your grandfather. I don't expect them. But you really have to embrace this. And I'm going to tell you a story that brings home this reality. And this is a real case that came to see my partner Victor and I. And this young man had gone to school at BCIT, which is a very, very good school, very difficult school. And he got a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then he got a 3-year postgraduate work permit. Well, it doesn't really matter what country he's from. As it turns out, he was Chinese, and he lived with Chinese roommates. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he had a language test that was good enough to be able to get into the school, but he spent his 4 years with his roommates, and then he got a 3-year postgraduate work permit, and he also worked in a company where he worked with other Chinese-speaking people. So by the time he came to see us, he had been in Canada for 6.5 years, and his language scores were at 4 and 5. He could not get language scores high enough for us to be able to help him to get permanent residence. And he had to go back. So he had 7 years in Canada, and he squandered that opportunity to be able to qualify for permanent residence. And believe me, back then when he came to see us 5 or 6 years ago, he could have qualified for permanent residence had he had the language scores. So you really have to understand that every second is precious. The time that you are studying in India, as well as the time that you are studying and working in Canada, and you have to know what your goals are and how you're going to achieve them, and use every opportunity. Another thing that I find is students only take a language test every 2 years. I would take a language test 3 times a year, or at least twice a year. If you don't know what your points score and what your CLB score is, and if you don't know what a CLB score is, you're not prepared to go become an immigrant in Canada. You need to know the jargon. And I've shared lists of blogs that we've written that if students want to read them, they can become familiar with this. Express Entry, at the end of this year, it's its 10th anniversary. It's been around for 10 years. And if you don't know what CLB is and what CRS is and all those, what an ECA is, then you're not ready to immigrate to Canada. So take a language test every 2 or 3 times a year and see where you need to improve. There are preparatory courses that you can take for all of these exams. Take them. You know, there's a science to writing exams, so learn how to write the exams so that you can get the scores that you need to qualify for them. Now, I'd also like to tell a story about my own experience in grade 12. So I was a pretty good student throughout my education, my high school education, and I had, A's and B's were my norm. Well, I went to a private school in my final year, grade 12, which I applied to myself. My parents didn't do that. I wanted to go away to school because I wanted to get the best education I could so that I would excel when I went to university. Well, when I got there, my French score, and I'd been taking French since I was 5 years old, and I hadn't gone to Quebec yet. I got a C- my first semester. And I was shocked. I'd never had a C- in my life. So what did I do? I went and saw my French teacher and I said, would you tutor me? We had private tutorials every Thursday for the rest of the year. I voluntarily wrote additional assignments. I said, I would write an essay and give it to my professor. He would grade it for me. I tried to write poetry in French. These were things that I just did myself because I wanted to get a better grade. So if you want to excel, you have to take the extra effort and the initiative to figure out how are you going to differentiate yourself from all these other students. By the end of the term, I got a B+. That was much better. Still wasn't an A.
Yes.
I wasn't happy about that, but it was a heck of a lot better than C-.
Just circling back to the CLB with the new requirements to apply for a work permit. Any graduate is required to sit for a CLB. You have to get a fresh CLB score. So do you think this is a positive thing that the IRCC has done, so that going back to the example of the Chinese student that you just shared, I think it's
I think it's long overdue. Many of these changes that are coming in are long overdue. As immigration practitioners, we've been advising the government about these things for a very long time. If I were telling, I get students to say, oh, I've got a CLB 7, or I've got an IELTS score 7 across the board. Good for you. That's the minimum. That's the minimum. You should be aiming for CLB 10s. That's your goal. If you can't get CLB 10s across the board in all 4 proficiency, not the cumulative proficiency. And you're very blessed here in Chandigarh in the sense that you can take an IELTS test and you can go take a CELPIP test. Yes. Take both tests. See which one that you do better at. If this is what you want to do, you have to be very focused and driven to get the scores that you need to qualify. The other thing that I'm going to give you an example about, I get a lot of law grads or foreign law grads who come to me and they want an article because they want to become lawyers in Canada. And to become a law grad, if you've got a foreign degree, you have to write national accreditation exams. I think they're called NCA exams. And then you have to article. Well, nowhere do they have a language requirement for NCA grads, which I think is a mistake. And I've had many foreign law grads article with me, and they can't write. They can't communicate in English well enough to be able to meet the requirements when you finish the bar exam. So they go to do the bar exam and they fail. And so I've spoken to the Law Society of British Columbia and said, why don't you have a minimum language requirement the same way that graduate students have a minimum requirement? And my understanding is that most graduate programs require a CLB of 9 or higher. I think to be a lawyer, that's what you do. You communicate. If you can't read, write, speak, and have yourself understood in the language you're communicating in, you can't do your job. So by extension, I think that having a set language threshold is long overdue. And the same applies to the schools that they are culling. I know there's a lot of trepidation that, what are we going to do? How is this going to affect us? Well, it doesn't affect any UFE student because UFE is a university. It's the creme de la creme. It's the upper echelon. And the students that have been going to school in Chandigarh have already been, culturalized, prepared for what Canada's like. Whether it's, and I've observed it when I come here. They know how to dress, they know how to speak, they know all the mannerisms. I have other international students that go to other schools, and when they come and apply for jobs in my office, I look at them, I go, what are you thinking? You're coming to my office in jeans and sneakers and applying for a job? Like, what are you thinking? So that doesn't apply to you, but in the sense that your students are going to the right school. But the other aspects, as I said, I would be making sure that my language proficiency is at the very highest level in all 4 proficiencies, and I would be now focusing on acquiring French as well.
That's amazing. That motivates me to start a English club as well, along with the French club. Well, we do have Toastmasters that does a really good job.
It is. Okay. You know which proficiency all immigrants stumble, or generally the one proficiency that is the most difficult? What do you think it is?
Speaking or listening, either.
Nope. If you have to read a textbook and understand your professor, comprehension, you're going to know how to read, you're going to know how to understand, and you're going to know how to speak. Writing. If you want to get a job in Canada, you got to be able to write properly. When I post a position and people send me their resumes, the ones that don't have the punctuation right, they don't have the capitalization right, they have small case or they're writing in slang, they go in the garbage. I don't even waste my time with them because I know that those people, A, can't communicate properly at the level that I'm going to need them to communicate for my job, and B, they don't have an attention to detail. So I don't want that.
That's very important. So with decades of experience that you have in law immigration, do you have, where do you think the whole immigration policies that are evolving are headed to in the next 5 years, as far as international students are concerned?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't have a magic wand. Right. As an immigration practitioner, I was very involved for many years with government and on the policy side of immigration programs. And I would be interviewed by newspapers about this policy or that policy. And one day I thought, all I ever do is criticize the government. But have I ever really thought about, if I were king, what immigration program would I introduce? That's a very, very difficult question to answer or strategy to come up with. But I've been practicing for almost 35 years, and I can tell you this. The pendulum never stops swinging back and forth. And the pendulum that has swung this way in the last 4 or 5 months or 4 or 5 weeks is going to swing back that way, okay? It's really just a matter of time. They will clear the COVID backlog. We are going to continue to need international students. If you read any of the news releases that have come out in the last 2 or 3 months about the changes to the international program, the minister's always talking about the value of international students and what they bring to the Canadian fabric and to our community and how they're integrated and they hit the ground running and so on and so forth. So this will change. The other thing that I would like to give some context to is what the numbers are, okay? Everybody's focusing on 21% less, 21% less. Oh my goodness, what is that going to mean? The 21% less means that the people that are going to what we refer to in our office as the garbage schools, that's going to clean them off the streets. It's not going to affect your students. It's not going to affect the students that are going to the public colleges and universities. In fact, if anything, it may hurt the students at the public colleges more than it will hurt the ones at the public universities. So it is going to correct itself, and They're going to, the levels plan, and I sent you the blog that I wrote, I think it was last week, about the changes to the levels plan. The levels plan has an in-Canada focus, and the in-Canada focus shifts, puts an emphasis on who's already in Canada. Well, that's what I call absorbing the COVID leftovers. And once those people are gone, we're going to need fresh meat, so to speak. And so that's where we're going to be turning to our international students. But my encouragement is to say, think about the programs where they're reducing the points. Do you want to go into a healthcare sector? You're not going to do that at UFE. Can you do a STEM program? Is there something that you can shift with your degree and go into something like that? Can you go into the Francophone program where there are reduced points? Are you going to take a master's degree? The master's program in British Columbia, or for the PNP, is a terrific program. So think outside the box. Do your degree here, take your whole 4 years at UFE, and then get a job in India for 3 or 4 years, and then go to Canada and take a master's program, okay? Or do your 4 years here, be part of the Francophone club, take your summers and go to a French country and spend 3 or 4 months learning another language. Maybe there's an opportunity for an exchange program for a whole semester in a French-speaking program. And then you can go and take a master's in Canada and continue to build upon what you've done in the past 7 years or 6 years. Only the strong are going to survive. The mediocre are going to be weeded out. And that's what this program is about.
So Canada's new policies emphasize stabilizing housing, healthcare, and other services for students. So how do you think these changes will impact the overall experiences for a student in Canada?
Again, I think that this is a reactionary measure. I honestly do not believe that the housing problem in Canada is a result of international students being in Canada. I mean, that's ridiculous. Back in the 90s, they had a term for Vancouver called Hongcouver, and that's because Hong Kong migration was so strong to Canada. And why was that? Because Hong Kong was being absorbed by China in 1997. So, and then the foreign buyers tax, again, that was on either Chinese migration. There's always some scapegoat, and right now, international students are one of the scapegoats. So I just think this is political, gobbledygook that is coming out there to justify these changes and to prepare for an election, whether it's probably not going to be this year, but it may be next year. And we've got a government that's in power and been in power for 10 years, and it's facing some challenges. So immigration is always topical. I cannot walk into a cocktail reception or a dinner party or a reception and say, "Hi, I'm an immigration lawyer," without the conversation getting very animated very quickly. You take a look at what the election in the United States was all about. Immigration was at the top of the list. So it's a very political, controversial, important topic. But the bottom line is Canada's not generating enough population to keep the country going. Neither is the United States, for that matter. The United States has got its own immigration problem. They just have a very porous border, and Canada doesn't have a very porous border. So it makes for a very different reality.
Just going back to housing, I'd just like to add that how the UFE community benefits, because when a student starts here in Chandigarh campus, their seniors, those students in second years or the third year, they go to the Canadian campus, right? And by the time these students here who have to transfer, and it's a cycle, and it's been going on like that, when these kids have to transfer, they don't have to worry about anything. They have their seniors, they have professors. We've got faculties from UFE coming and teaching here. So I mean, it's a community. This is not seen, it's experienced. So until you're a part of the community. So and this year it's amazing. I know a story of 4 students who rented out a 4-bedroom house in Abbotsford, and they are paying around $700 each. Well, if you go take an independent shared or an independent room for rent, I think you were not paying anything less than $1,000 or $1,200. So these kids were able to achieve it because of the community benefit that they have.
Well, I hadn't mentioned that. I meant to put that in the very beginning. I actually grew up in Abbotsford, and I attended UFV. It wasn't UFV at the time, it was Fraser Valley College, for almost 2 years. I did my second year of university there. I did it part-time because I was working. And not only are the students that are here better prepared because they have a university family, both here and in Canada, but Abbotsford has an enormous Indo-Canadian community. Enormous, and it has ever since I was in elementary school. I can still remember the first young boy in my grade 3 class. I know his name; it's seared on my brain, and that was very different. Yeah. But I can tell you, you can live in Abbotsford and never speak a word of English. Not if you're following my advice, but it's feasible to do that. So having that family environment is really great, but having that community, because the community wants to support successful students and successful academics within its community, and there are opportunities for employment within that. Just don't speak Punjabi or Hindi at work.
There are these policy shifts that Canada immigration has brought in. So in a broader way, how do you think this impacts the economic and social pressures to immigration?
I don't think it does. As I said, I think it's reactionary, and I don't think it's really legitimate. As I said before, I don't think the students are scapegoats. But by the same token, I don't agree that it's the government's responsibility to solve the housing crisis for international students, nor do I think it's the university's responsibility. I mean, one of the things the government is doing is saying, you have to develop a certain amount of housing for students, or we're not going to give you an allocation of slots for your students for them to come. I think that is misguided as well. I like the model that you told me about your 4 students who, because they had a community and because they knew what they were doing, they went there and they rented a house. You have to stand on your own 2 feet. That's the point that I'm telling you. That's what international education is all about, or that's what post-secondary education is all about. It's becoming an adult. It's maturing. It's going out into the world and standing on your own. So I don't think people should think, my school is going to do this for me, my government is going to do this for me. Do it for yourself.
I think we're done with the questions. So is there anything you want to add?
Well, there are a few things. So one of the points that I wanted to refer to is that, we talked about the 21%, but we haven't talked really about what the levels mean. And up until 2015, 2016, ironically, when our Trudeau government was elected, immigration levels had stayed at around 250,000 to 260,000 immigrants a year for over 15 years. Okay, you can even find that data on the Government of Canada website, okay? It's available. Well, Mr. Trudeau gets elected in November of 2015. The levels plan has to come out by November 1st. So before November 1st of 2016, the immigration minister at the day, I can't remember who it was, starts with a level of 300,000. And it continued upwards till where by 2025 and 2026, it was at 500,000. So within a decade, it more than doubled. It doubled. So now it's going down by 21%. So next year it's going to be 395,000. The year after it's going to be 380,000. And the year after that it's going to be 365,000. Big deal. 365,000 immigrants a year is still a heck of a lot more than 250,000. And we don't even know that that's going to be the number. It's a projected target. If, as many of us are projecting in Canada, the business community is suffering, those numbers are going to change. You got to remember, immigration is a political portfolio, and it goes back and forth based upon the political winds of the day. So there's still a lot of room for opportunity for immigration within that 400 to 360,000 number, and there's every reality that it may increase before 2027 rolls around. The one other thing that I wanted to close with, and I really want parents as well as students to take this to heart. The purpose of post-secondary education and the purpose of an international education is the value of the education itself. You have to appreciate, why are you doing this? And if you are doing this solely so that you will or your child will get Canadian immigration at the end of the day, then that is the wrong reason for doing it. You have to do this because you inherently value what the education represents in your life overall. You know, when I was a little girl, my father sat me down on the couch. I can still remember it. I can still remember the color of the couch. And he said, you know, Catherine, when there is a disaster, whatever it is, there can be war. They can take your house away from you. They can take your furniture away from you. They can take your possessions away from you, but they can never take your education away from you. So no one can ever take your education away. Nobody can ever take your UFV experience, whether in Chandigarh or Canada or both. And your opportunities for employment, for success, are enhanced, whether in Canada, in India, or anywhere else in the world. And that's got to be your motivation for going to UFV Chandigarh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.